Historical epics are a special type of film that are more than just entertainment, they're also an experience. These films are massive both in terms of the scale of the story and the runtime of these films. Films like Lawrence of Arabia and Ten Commandments were more than just 3-hour films. They were a sort of spectacle that you remembered and thought about far after the film ended. Everything in these movies is bigger and more spectacular than that of a traditional movie. What lasts 3 hours feels like stepping through a whole lifetime. What is it that makes these films so special though? In this video, I'm going to examine some of the key elements of historical epics and see what separates them from other movies and how these elements make a film so spectacular. One of the primary things that makes historical epics so different from other films is the way they use practical sets. It's not that it's uncommon for movies to film in certain locations or build large props for a movie, but historical epics did all this on a much larger scale. The way these movies built towering structures and made use of thousands of human extras is impressive in terms of the movie making process, but also makes the viewing experience magical because you see the massive scale of these stories created in visual form, and it's as good as you can get without physically being there. Without the film Ten Commandments, it's hard to appreciate the scale of some of the events described. There might be paintings of Moses parting the Red Sea, but they don't really capture the motion and realism of seeing Charlton Heston separating the water and the crowd of people huddled all around, waiting to walk through the walls of water, which was achieved by pouring thousands of gallons of water into a tank in a studio and then reversing the footage. This scene is a monumental achievement, especially for 1956, and helps cement the scale of the film into the mind of the audience from the large amount of human extras present to the sheer volume of the water. The power of scale can also be seen through the way Lawrence of Arabia is filmed entirely in real deserts. Filming in the desert makes everything about the journey feel more real. Even though you aren't there, you can feel the heat and dry air beating down on the characters, and it gives the movie access to these wide, open landscapes that are beautiful and really place the audience in the setting with the characters. That's really the key to what makes the practical sets so important and why these directors went to such great lengths to physically show something on the screen. It puts the audience in the shoes of these characters and helps them experience the journey from their seat. One element that subtly makes these historical epics so spectacular is the way they handle time. The length of these movies is incredibly long, typically over 3 hours, to ensure that the audience understands the scale of the story being told, and the editing pace is much slower than other movies so that the audience can truly take in the visuals, becoming part of the epic rather than just a viewer. Very often, shots would linger on vast landscapes, not because the audience needs to study the picture, but because the audience needs to soak in the feeling. This slow burn approach builds emotion and tension across the entire runtime of the film, helping the audience get closer to the time burden that the characters in the films are feeling. Although not as old as other historical epics, Sergio Leone's western Once Upon a Time in the West captures this idea perfectly with the duel at the end of the film. Harmonica has spent his entire life trying to avenge his brother by killing the outlaw Frank. By the end of the film, decades of vengeance have built up in this character, and it's hard to make the audience feel that amount of tension, even through a nearly 3-hour movie. But the editing when these two characters finally meet is so slow and operatic that as an audience, the tension and anticipation is slowly building over these long sequences, just as it's been building across all of Harmonica's life. It might be possible to tell the story of the Wild West or the story of Moses in a shorter span of time, but making the audience sit with these characters for over 3 hours puts the audience in the shoes of these characters and makes the movie experience as grand as their adventures. The purpose of making these historical epics isn't just to tell a story, but to create an experience for the audience that comes close to the experiences of these larger-than-life stories. An element of these films that's fundamental to the film process is the way various shots are composed, and along with that is the aspect ratio that these historical epics choose to film in. One of the most powerful visuals in a historical epic is when the camera shows off a massive open landscape or a large number of human extras. These types of shots are so spectacular because they show off so much detail and make events seem larger than life. And this is accomplished by filming in really wide aspect ratios. Simply using widescreen gives you an expansive view, as the wider you shoot, the more you see of the landscape on the left and right. But when you combine that with great shot composition, you get a really unique visual style that films a frame with something to look at, from left to right, foreground to background. One of the best films to do this is Ben-Hur from 1959, which has both an incredibly wide aspect ratio and amazing composition that makes use of the foreground and the background incredibly well. The aspect ratio for Ben-Hur is much wider than most other films, and comparing it to Spartacus, which also has great epic visuals, you can see just how wide the frame is, giving so much room on the left and right for massive landscapes and crowds. This incredibly wide frame also allows for these really interesting shots where something like a face will be in focus on one side, and then there will be something else to look at in the background. This doesn't only happen in Ben-Hur. Once Upon a Time in the West has a similar shot at a train station, with the train in the background contrasting the face in the foreground. This type of shot makes the visuals of the film incredibly interesting and seems larger than a typical movie shot because it adds depth to the frame. Using these wide landscape shots and these stacked compositions helps historical epics feel larger than life and play a key role in making the scenes of these movies so memorable. Although historical epics are just a genre of movie, they end up being experiences more than just an entertaining movie. The scale of everything from the story to the characters to the visuals is so much larger than other movies, and as such, watching these movies becomes a memorable experience. More than just observing a story, the scale of these films makes you feel like you were really there, like you were crossing the desert with Lawrence of Arabia. There's a transformative power of this genre that makes it more spectacular when done right than any other genre. Even at nearly 3 hours long, every scene from Once Upon a Time in the West stands out in my mind just because of how big everything is and how the film lets scenes and landscapes soak into the audience's mind. There are tons of great historical epics from the big adventure films of the 50s, even into the modern day with films like Gladiator and Braveheart, so be sure to let me know your favorite epic film in the comments. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for new videos every Thursday.